Hello, and welcome to Games Past Their Prime. This is a show where I take a look at video games to determine if they are past their prime or not. For me to do so, though, there are a couple key categories which I look at. Story, presentation, and gameplay. Then at the very end, there's a conclusion section where I wrap everything up in a nice little bow. You guys have read the title. You know what game we're playing. Let's take a look at Resident Evil.
Resident Evil.
On July 24th, 1998, when a series of bizarre murders occur on the outskirts of a fictional Midwestern town named Raccoon City, the Raccoon City Police Department STARS team, also known as the Special Tactics and Rescue Squad, are assigned to investigate. After contact with the Bravo team is lost, Alpha Team is sent in after them to find why they have disappeared. Alpha Team is able to locate Bravo Team's downed helicopter and decides to land at the site to investigate it. However, once they land, they find they are attacked by a pack of monstrous dogs, killing one of the team members, Joseph Frost. At this point, Alpha Team's helicopter, Brad Vickers, panics and takes off alone, leaving the rest of his team on the ground. The remaining members, Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Albert Wesker, and Barry Burton, are forced to seek refuge in a nearby abandoned mansion. Depending on which character the player decides to take control of, either Chris or Barry ends up getting separated from the rest of the team during the chase and does not make it to the mansion. At this point, the team decides to split up to investigate and agree to meet back in the main hall after a short time. After encountering the first zombie, the player will go back to the hall to find that Wesker is also now missing. The other two characters decide to continue investigating to try and find everyone that has gone missing. Over the course of the game, the player character may encounter several members of Bravo Team, including Enrico Marini, the captain of the STARS Bravo Team, who reveals that one of Alpha Team's members is a traitor before he ends up being shot and killed by an unseen assailant. The player continues through the game and eventually learns that a series of illegal experiments were being undertaken by a clandestine research team under the authority and supervision of a biomedical company called Umbrella. The creatures that are roaming the mansion and its surrounding areas are the result of these experiments, which have exposed the mansion's personnel and various animals and insects to a highly contagious and mutagenic biological agent known as the T-virus. Eventually, the player will discover a secret underground lab containing Umbrella's experiments. In the lab, the player ends up encountering Wesker, who reveals that he is the double agent working for Umbrella and plans to use the Tyrant, a giant humanoid super soldier, to kill the remaining STARS members. However, during the confrontation, Wesker ends up going missing again, and the player character ends up defeating the Tyrant. After the lab's self-destruct system is activated, the player character reaches the helipad and manages to contact Brad for extraction, at which point the player may end up being confronted by Tyrant one last time. Now, there are multiple endings, but the canon ending, which also happens to be the best ending, sees Chris, Jill, and depending on which character you play it as, either Rebecca or Barry escaping the mansion after defeating the Tyrant and watching the mansion explode. Now, this story isn't bad by any means. However, a lot of it isn't fully told or explained to you. A lot of the story you actually need to find either through books or letters, kind of stuff like that you need to read through. Also, the whole Wesker being evil thing sort of feels like it kind of comes out of left field, but if you're paying attention, there are some signs to it, but if you are playing for the very first time, you may end up missing a lot of these hints. Personally, this is my first playthrough of the OG game, however, I already knew the story and easily was able to pick out those hints without much of a problem. If I played it when I was younger, I may not have noticed that, and may have found the twist to feel a bit annoying, to be honest. It just feels like there is very little setup to Wesker being the bad guy other than looking like the trope villain and going missing all the time. Now, as I said before, you can play as different characters, and I will go into the main differences in the gameplay section, but I feel I should bring it up here since it does matter. You can play as either Jill or Chris, and this does change up the story a bit here and there, but a lot of the main points are exactly the same. For example, if you are playing as Jill, you will have your partner that helps you through the game being Barry, but if you are playing as Chris, your partner through the game will actually be Rebecca. Again, I don't think the story is bad by any means, but I would say it is a bit weak in comparison to the rest of the game. However, this is just my personal opinion. I'm sure there are plenty of people who love the story completely as is. Alright, so the very first thing you will notice is the glorious and cheesy FMV in this game. It's really only at the intro and outro of the game, but it is still so funny to watch again, because frankly, no matter how fond of this game you may be, even you have to admit that the FMV is just not that good. Now let's move on to the in-game graphics, and it's very clear from just looking at this game that it is fairly early 3D. The models are quite rough around the edges, and frankly they barely even have a face to look at. Now what I will say that I do like is that while this game is a survival horror game, and for sure is a dark and kind of bleak game, like it should be, it still uses a good amount of color in the right areas. The characters have a bit of color to their uniforms, and even some of the rooms and walls still kind of have that kind of lived-in color to it. It's not just dark and boring. It just shows to me that you can make a dark and scary game and still leave color in the game. Too often nowadays you see these horror games tend to stray away from using basically any color because they want to quote-unquote make it more scary by using darker colors or muting the colors that are already there. To me, this will just lead to a game that looks muddy and boring to look at, if I'm going to be completely honest. Something I feel like I will be bringing up further down the road. Anyways, one of the key features of a lot of these Resident Evil games are these camera angles that you move in between throughout the game. Now, not having control of the camera leads to some amount of benefit. For example, it allows the developers to show exactly what they want to the player and nothing more. In some of these cases, you can see this shown in the game, where certain rooms or areas look actually really good from these camera angles, which I can appreciate because I imagine these could not be easy to do on the PS1 hardware. Now let's talk about the sound, and this game is quote-unquote voice acted. While there is voice acting, quote-unquote, in this game, I wouldn't exactly call it good. It's in fact pretty bad. So bad in fact that you will find yourself laughing at it a lot. Like, if you don't believe me here, I'm gonna show you a couple of these clips because they are just hilariously bad.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But Chris's... What is it?
Blood. Jill, see if you can find any other clues. I'll be examining this. Hope this is not Chris's blood.
Oof, those scenes, man, those voice acting is so bad. I think I'm gonna need to make myself some food for this or something, I don't know. This is just awful.
What is it?
Kenneth was killed too. Maybe by this creature. Anyway, let's report this to Wesker.
Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
Thanks. Maybe I'll need it.
Alright guys, I'm back. I decided to make myself a sandwich. That's a good sandwich.
Oh, Barry!
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
Jill? Alright, now with that out of the way, let's talk a bit about the soundtrack. Because it's better than I fully expected it to be. Now you may not notice it while you are playing, but it really does add a really good atmosphere. It's creepy and very subtle. There was a lot of music I missed until I found the soundtrack online. It's far better than it has any right to be. So here, let me play some and just imagine some of the dark and moody areas in the game while you do, because you'll find that it tends to match those areas pretty dang well, actually. So this is another game that is incredibly easy to identify. Resident Evil is, in its core, a survival horror game. Now the reason why I say at its core is because it does have some action, it does have some puzzles, but also because it isn't what you would consider survival horror today. See, nowadays when I think of horror or horror games, I think of stupid loud noises and jump scares. OG Resident Evil didn't really do this. Now don't get me wrong, sometimes you will get a bit of a jump here and there, but it really wasn't that bad. For example, I can think of a couple of times that made me nearly crap my pants. The first time was early on in the game. I was running down a hallway and all of a sudden, 2 zombie dogs jumped through the windows of that hallway at you. Now for reference, at this point you likely have only seen 1, maybe 2 zombies. And the normal zombies really aren't that scary. They move slow and are fairly easy to kill. Hell, they don't even look exactly all that scary. So at this point in the game, you really aren't put too much on edge other than the kind of creepy sound and environments. Then out of nowhere, you have dogs trying to eat your face. Then, when I got further into the game and the hunters appeared, the amount of times that I would turn a corner in that mansion to be graced by a hunter trying to jump down my damn throat is far too high. And every time it happened, I felt like I was going to need to run to the bathroom. See, what I actually like about this game is that for its horror, it relies on the encounters, the creepy music, and the creepy graphics to trip you out. It doesn't need any of those BS jump scares to make it feel scary. This is why I don't play horror games at all anymore. There is very few people that I have watched play these newer horror games that don't jump at a jump scare, even if it's not that scary. So because of this, I feel like I need to give credit. Even though the graphics aren't exactly great, they did a good job at still making these games fairly creepy. Now, I wouldn't exactly call it very scary, but it'll give you an on-edge feeling every now and again. Now, I feel like I need to talk about some of the gameplay elements, and this is where I'm sure I'm going to piss off a lot of people. Firstly, let's talk about the tank controls. I will go more in depth on them in the control segment here in a bit, but let's be perfectly honest, these tank controls are a bit shit, aren't they? I've heard people try to defend this idea because it, quote, puts the player on edge, but wait, it puts the player on edge because the controls are, what? Shit? So you are going to sit there and tell me the controls are great because they are shit. What? Anyways, I'm just simply going to say they aren't very good. In fact, I'm now going to show you exactly what I mean. Alright, so let's just start with the movement here. So if I push up on the D-pad, Jill will move forward. If I push down on the D-pad, she will move backwards. If I push right, she will rotate right. If I push left, she will rotate left. Now these controls feel a little stiff, like you can kind of move in circles, but you can see that it's really not very good. She takes very wide circles. It also doesn't feel very good. I don't know, just something about it just feels clunky. Like, I don't know if you can actually hear it, but my controller is creaking from me pushing around on these buttons as hard as I am. And now if I push square and push forward, she will start to run. And again, the same issue arises where she turns, but it feels like if I want to make sharp turns, I basically have to stop in place, turn, and then move again. Stop in place, move, and go. Like, it's just, these controls are very awkward at first to get used to, and they just don't feel very good in my opinion. Some people will like these controls, and some people can get used to these controls, others might not be able to. I just feel like this is a pretty big downfall in my opinion. Now if I press R1, you will see Jill will ready her weapon. If I were to press X, she will now fire that weapon. Pretty simple. Now if I want to reload, there isn't a way to actually do it on the controller. I'd actually have to push start to bring up my inventory screen, and I don't have bullets in my inventory, but if I did, I could go onto the bullets, press X, and then there's this combine option, and if I combine it with the gun, it would reload the gun. I don't know why they did it this way. It just feels monotonous and really silly, but they did it, and there's not much you can do about it. Now if I want to get out of this inventory screen, I can just press X, square, not X, I don't know why I said X. Press square, it'll back you out. Now if I press start and select at the same time, you can see it's going to bring up my options and my config. You can mess around a little bit with the configurations, but I don't know why you would want to. There isn't much you can really do. You can just change the different types and you can edit, but there's not really much of a use to it. It's there, and there's not much you can really do. Alright, so X is going to be your main interact button. You can open doors with it. If I were to try to open this door, I don't know what would actually happen. I can open the door and you can see it's going to go into a loading screen. As you saw there, X is going to open doors, pretty simple. It also allows you to pick up objects and stuff that you see on the ground. Now, what I don't understand again by the whole not reloading thing is, first off, you can see triangle doesn't really do anything. Even if I pull up the options here, you can see triangle doesn't do anything, circle doesn't do anything. Why is there not a button to reload? I don't understand this. I really don't understand this at all. It doesn't make any sense to why you would possibly do this. It's dumb, it's silly, it makes no sense. You have two buttons here on the controller that are in not use right now. So why would you not have the ability to push one of those buttons to reload? Why do I have to go into the inventory screen, then click combine, then go to the gun, and then combine the weapon, and then have to back out of the inventory screen? That's just extra work for absolutely no reason. So hopefully with my explanations here of the controls a little bit, you can kind of see and understand why I really am not a fan of these controls. Yes, you can get used to them, but why should I have to? Why should I have to get used to these crappy controls? Just because I want to play Resident Evil? That's just silly, nonsensical, and frankly, not a very good excuse. So, with that said, let's head back to the main script where I have plenty more of hot takes about Resident Evil that I'm sure a lot of people are going to love to listen to. Alright, so now that I'm done talking about the controls here, I feel the need to talk about a few other things I don't like that this game does, and I will try to end on a good note, I think. So first off, I don't care what anyone says. The ink ribbons are a dumb idea. In case you don't know, you have to save at these typewriters throughout the game, but to use them, you must have an ink ribbon. This just feels really dumb. And I know people will tell me that it's there to put stress on you since you can only find so many, and that you need to plan out when you can save. Excuse me? Isn't that the point of having the save rooms? You know they aren't exactly that close to each other, and there are only so many typewriters in the game as well. So why would you double down on this? It makes no sense. You can run through the game, and obviously you are trying to plan out when and how you save, and then you push it too far and die and lose 20 minutes of progress because you didn't want to waste ribbon even though you were at a save room. That is just dumb. I don't care really what anyone says. It's stupid and shouldn't be there at all. Now remember, I am playing the OG game before the director's cut where they had an easy mode. From my understanding, to fix that, all they did was give you more ribbons. What's the point of having them at all then? Just get rid of them or make them a hard mode for people if you want. But forcing this idea is just really stupid. I hate it, it makes no sense, it feels like it already does the job of the typewriters. Now if you could save anywhere you wanted, then I could understand having the ink ribbons, but having both is just stupid. They do the same job. Now, I actually want to move on to the difficulty of the game. Again, I was playing the OG game, so there wasn't really a difficulty setting, but there sorta kinda was. So when you start the game, you can either play as Jill or Chris. Jill is basically the easy mode because you have 6 inventory slots and get the lockpick, which is super useful and doesn't take up an inventory slot. Now choosing Chris would be the harder option because he gets only 4 inventory slots, and instead of having the lockpick, he will need to pick up keys that would allow him to open up any locked doors or desks. Now, beyond these differences, the game is a bit different here and there, but I can't speak on those because I didn't beat both. I only finished Jill's run and played only a little bit of Chris's. However, from what I could tell, the majority of the game and its difficulty beyond those changes were pretty much the same. Ammo for guns are scarce, but if you plan correctly and conserve your ammo correctly, you should be able to make it through the game without too much of an issue. Honestly, I think this game is one of the most fair when it comes to its difficulty compared to a lot of older games I have played. It's hard in some places, even downright brutal, but it's also very much doable if you are smart about it. I honestly really like that the most about this game is that even when I did die, I almost never felt like it was unfair. It almost always felt like it was my own fault in some way or another. Now, this must have been pretty hard to balance because of how bad the controls were. I was expecting the controls to get much more in the way of the rest of the game than it really did. Though there were a couple sections where it definitely was the controls that were killing me in those stupid camera angles, but we'll ignore that. I think the difficulty is something that deserves praise for the devs who made this because that is an incredibly hard line to walk. Now, there are bosses in the game, but honestly they feel kind of like a joke. You can beat them relatively easily if you bring the right equipment with you. Even then, in most cases, if you don't and you happen to stumble into a boss fight, you can typically leave and come back with the equipment you need. Now, this isn't always true. You may end up dying and realizing that you will need to gear up at this point in the game, which can be annoying, but it's most of the time not that big of an issue, and most bosses feel like they are hinted at if you are really paying attention. Now, there are a few different weapons throughout the game. You have your standard pistol, your trusty shotgun, the Magnum, and Jill ends up getting a grenade launcher. You'll find out pretty early on, the pistol is pretty bad, but it does its job well enough at the start. However, the minute you get the shotgun, you will likely find yourself using this most of the time, because if you aim up, you can blow a normal zombie's head off with one shot. So the amount of ammo you get for the shotgun can actually take you pretty far in the game. As for the Magnum, this gun is incredibly powerful, and I really only used it when I ran out of ammo for everything else. Or I would use it on a boss if I needed to. The grenade launcher is what I used after I would run out of the shotgun ammo, and I would use this typically on bosses because it would just do a lot of damage to them. I really had no issues with bosses. I mean, you fire basically 4 to 6 rounds of the grenade launcher and most bosses are going to be dead. Now, with the limited amount of inventory slots, you may be asking yourself, how do you carry everything? Well, at the save rooms, you can find these boxes where you can drop off items that you don't want to carry with you anymore. Thankfully, all of these boxes are somehow linked to each other, so if you drop off something at one box, you can find that same item at a different box. This is how you will most likely be managing your inventory since you can't just drop items, which, by the way, would have been very useful, and I'm surprised that they didn't seem to have that option. Now, there are plenty of puzzles throughout the game, but they mostly revolve around picking up items, putting an item into a slot on the wall, or pick up an item and inspect it to get a new item, or even more commonly, move this object to this spot and unlock something or gain access to a neighbor area by doing so. They are pretty simple if I'm going to be honest, but it's a nice change of pace. That is one thing I will say this game does pretty well, is that with all of the elements in the game, they do a good job at not making it too boring with the mix of action, horror, and puzzles. Anyways, without droning on too much more, I think we should just move on to the verdict here. I think I've talked about everything I really wanted to mention here. The verdict of Resident Evil 1 OG is a game past its prime. Now, before I hear someone get the pitchforks and start hunting me down, just hear me out on this. There is one core reason why this game is past its prime. It's really simple when you look at it, and it's because of this right here. That's right. Resident Evil on the GameCube. This is the sole reason that I don't think playing the original game anymore is really worth anyone's time. But to further prove my point, let's actually jump into Resident Evil on the GameCube. That's right, I'm actually going to do a dual review today. And while it's not going to be a typical dual review, it's going to be more of a compare and contrast review, I still think it's worth doing just to prove my point. So I'm not going to retell the exact same story here because it is, well, exactly the same, so what's the point? See, Resident Evil HD is, well, an HD remake, basically. Because of this, the story is the same, so there really isn't a need for me to talk about it in depth, so instead I'm going to compare and contrast how each game tells its story, its presentation, its gameplay, and then I'll have that conclusion section at the end, of course. So, while there are cutscenes and story here and there in the OG game, there feels like there is even more going on within the HD game. These cutscenes are a great improvement to the story because what they add is great hinting at who the bad guy is, and actually does a great job at trying to point fingers towards Barry being the bad guy more than Wesker. Now if you pay attention, you can still find a lot of the written material that will point more towards Wesker being the villain, but it's just fun to see the game try and improve this story and try to make the villain more of a mystery than they did with the OG game. Also, an interesting thing they added is that you get to learn about who built the mansion and why. You find out that one of the monsters you end up meeting in a cabin in the woods was named Lisa, who was this guy's daughter, which is pretty effed up when you think about it. Also, another interesting thing about Lisa is that as far as I'm aware of, she is the only monster you can't kill in the game, which again is just kind of an interesting move to make, and obviously a very deliberate one. So, overall, I would say that the HD version of the game does a much better job at handling the story. Now, obviously, the HD remake did have some benefits as far as the story goes. The OG game came out in 1996, while the remake was out in 2002. Now, this isn't a lot of time between games, but during this time they released Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. So they continued to improve on the story, and by the time they made the HD remake, they knew exactly where their story was going to go. Well, when they made the OG game, they may not have known exactly where they were going with the story. However, that just means that in my mind, the more definitive story is with the HD remake, since they knew exactly where they were going with the story, and so it was very easy to piece everything together. Now, I'm not saying the OG story was bad at all, I just feel the HD is a better version of that story. Now, this section is going to be a bit harder for me, because obviously the HD game has better graphics. Now, while this is true, I'm really not going to use this as a sticking point. There may be some people out there who will prefer the HD version just because of the graphics, but I don't weigh that really all that heavily in most of my reviews, unless of course the graphics are either really bad or way better than other games in that same time period. However, I do want to bring up pretty much everything else around the presentation. So first, let's talk about color. And this is likely going to be one of the few times where I prefer the OG game to the HD. HD does what many games nowadays does when they try to do a horror game. The colors are all muted, it's dark, it's bleak, and it's all boring. Even the colorful rooms that the OG game has, yeah, you don't really get that with the HD game, literally at all. So frankly, when it comes to the variety of color, OG impressed me because they were able to still have a colorful environment and still make it feel like a creepy setting, so props there. Now let's talk about the voice acting, and to be perfectly frank about it, it's very clear the HD remake has improved massively with the effort to have better voice acting. Don't get me wrong, people like the OG voice acting because it's funny, but it's funny because it's just not as good, so I'm glad the HD remake has improved this. Though the HD remake did still leave in some of those really badly written dialogue parts, but I'm pretty sure this was actually done on purpose as a callback to the OG game, so I am fine with some of the cheesy, cringy one-liners. Now, as for the music and overall sound of the game, this is actually really close. I think both games have very good music and have very good sounds. However, I will say they did a little bit more improvement on the HD side. I think the music is just a little bit more creepy. I think the ambient sound puts me a little bit more on edge, but they are both very good and very well done. So overall, as far as presentation goes, both HD and OG have their ups and downs, but I think HD just barely overtakes it by having better voice acting and slightly better music and sound. This section is by far going to be the closest section between the two games because the next section is the gameplay section, and that is where I would say they differ the most.
You're gonna make it.
Thanks.
Alright, so the core of the games are the same. They both are survival horror games with a bit of action and with some puzzles. However, let's just first address the controls, and rather than try to explain everything, I'm just going to jump right in the control segment and explain it there. So right away, you may notice the controls will be fairly similar. So for example, if I push up on the control stick, Jill will move forward, push back, she walks backwards, turn right, and she will sort of rotate right. She feels a little slower when she does this, but she does rotate. And left, same situation. Now if I press B, this is what's going to enable her to run, kind of like Square did in the OG game. But the one difference here is that it feels like she runs in much tighter circles, and it feels more smooth to run. I feel like the animation looks smoother. I feel like my control of her, it feels a lot tighter. I don't feel like I'm having to stress pushing down a lot on the control stick or in the other game on the D-pad to get her to move. So I really do appreciate this. The one thing that I don't like is that it does feel slower to just rotate in place. Not sure why this is, but it's there. Now, everything about the controls here just feels a little bit smoother. If I push down on the R button here on the top, Jill will ready her weapon. Press A, Jill fires weapon. It also looks a lot nicer to fire the weapon, but I think that's just because of better graphics. Now, the one thing they did that is exactly the same that really bothers me is if I want to reload this weapon, I have to push Y to go to my inventory screen. I then would have to find the bullets, combine the bullets with said item, and then I would have a reloaded pistol. Now, why they did this bothers me, because now, if I push B to back out of the screen here, you will find that the X button over here, if I push it, does nothing. It does absolutely nothing, and there is absolutely no excuse. You have guys had several years to remake this game, and you still refuse to have a reload function in your game, other than having to go in the inventory screen. There is no excuse for this. This is the only thing that bothers me about these controls, and I don't even know why they did it. I really don't. It doesn't make sense to me. Now that aside, one thing they did add that I do like is that if I push down on the C stick, Jill will rotate. She will do a 180. Now, the one thing is, I didn't use this as often as I think I would normally have if I wasn't constantly forgetting that it existed. But this definitely is an improvement. I remember in the OG game, quite often the hunters would jump over you, and the kind of annoyance to have to forcefully turn around because in that game there wasn't a 180 was really annoying. So this option is very nice in case that does happen. Again, I didn't run into too many circumstances where I would actually need this, but it's nice that it's there. Now the A button is your end-all be-all button. It opens doors, and in this case, for example, if I want to pick up the ink ribbons here, press A. Now it asks if I want to take the weapon. If I want to take the ink weapons, of course, yes, I want to take the ink ribbons. But A does basically everything. It picks up items, it opens doors. I mean, it shoots your gun when you have it readied. I mean, it's your end-all be-all button that you use constantly throughout the game. Now, the other thing you will notice is that, obviously, as I said, Y is your inventory, so obviously start brings up your options instead of having to do, like, start select. So they just made it a little easier to get to. Not a big deal. Kind of nice, though. And the other thing they did that I really do like is there's a dedicated map button. If I push Z, it brings up my map. This map is so much nicer than the old map. I will go into depth about that in a little bit, but I absolutely love this map. It is very well done. That's all I'm going to say about it right now. It's very well done. So with that said, hopefully you kind of understand why I think these controls are better than that of OG's. Not only do you have the 180 turnarounds, the running feels smoother, the controls in general of the movement feel a lot smoother. I feel like I have a lot more control over Jill, which is a big improvement because I can now weave my way around zombies if I decide I don't actually want to engage them, especially if I'm out of ammo for whatever reason. I love the aiming here. It just feels a little nicer. It feels like I rarely ever miss. By the way, I know I didn't mention this in the other one, but if you are aiming, you can push up to aim high or down low. So if there's a zombie on the ground, you can shoot him, or like I talk about later in the game, or later, or maybe earlier, I don't remember when this is going to be put. If you have a shotgun and you aim up, you can pop him in the face. Pretty nice. But just all the controls in general just feel much smoother, just more responsive. I really have very little complaints other than the X button not being used for reload. That still bothers me. I don't know why. Anyways, let's just jump back to the rest of the script and maybe you will understand why I think this game is the more preferable way to play. So right there you can see just how much better the controls are in the HD remake. However, not only are the controls better, but they fixed, mostly, the transition screens. Now, they aren't perfect. Sometimes you can still get stuck being hit from one transition screen to the next, but overall this is fairly rare. Now let's talk about other things I think are a massive improvement on the gameplay. First, the HD remake has a difficulty setting, which I like, but I'm pretty sure the director's cut of the game also had this. So I like that they brought that over. I still don't like how all they did was basically give you way more ammo and a crap ton of ink ribbons so you can save whenever you want. However, this did make it easy to get through the game since I didn't feel like playing on the normal difficulty for the HD remake. Didn't really see a point since I was only trying to compare and contrast, so why bang my head against a wall if I don't have to? Regardless, having the option of a difficulty is a great thing and I'm glad it's here. Now, they added in another gun. There may be more. I only played Jill's run and found the tactical shotgun that holds more rounds. I don't know if it does more damage or not, but it's just cool that they added more into the HD game from the OG game. Now, another thing they changed that I actually like is that they made the zombies more scary in this version. See, now you need to actually burn the zombies' bodies, or you have to blow off their heads. Because if you don't, they turn into red-headed zombies that will just bull rush you and they just deal a crap ton of damage and are just pretty much impossible to kill. It creates a more stressful environment, which is just a really cool way to further the intensity of the game. Now, another thing they improved on is the puzzles. There is more of them, and while most of them are still fairly easy, there are a couple that make you think a bit more, which I really do appreciate. I'm just going to continue this train of things the HD remake did better than OG. The map. The map system is far improved. You can tell when an area has been fully searched, but even better, not only does it tell you what room you are in like OG did, but it shows you where in that room you are with a little icon. This icon also tells you what direction you are also facing. So moving around in this game is much easier because you know exactly where you are currently at and know how to get from one room to the next very easily. Another thing that I like is that they changed up the areas a little bit. They did a good job at keeping the layout mostly the same, but also added in a little bit more areas to the game that actually make sense. It doesn't feel like these new areas are forced in at all. They feel like they naturally fit into the whole entire map, and I really do appreciate this about the game. Even with this though, the game doesn't really feel to be that much longer than the OG game, which did surprise me, but I think this is because there are many more shortcuts in this game. The long and short of it is that the HD remake does everything in the gameplay section better. There really isn't much more to it than that if I'm going to be honest. So with that said, let's head down to the conclusion section. So I think you can see why if you want to play Resident Evil 1 again, you should play the HD remake over that of the OG game. However, in case you skipped ahead, didn't watch the whole video, or just want me to break down the 5 reasons why, well, let's just go ahead and do that. Let me break down the top 5 reasons I believe the HD remake is the version you should play over the OG game. Number 1. The story in HD is just better. They do a better job with more cutscenes that help to further the story more, and they do a better job at trying to create mystery around who the actual bad guy is. And frankly, that is just leagues above what OG started with. Number 2. The overall presentation is also better in the HD remake over the OG. Now, the color is better in the OG, and the use of color as well. But to be honest, the graphics are better in HD, the voice acting is better in HD, the cutscenes are better in HD, the music is a little better in HD, and the atmosphere is just better in HD. 3. The controls are far better in HD. Now, they are still tank controls, but they feel much more smooth. It's not stiff like an OG. Everything just feels a bit more responsive in the HD version. Number 4. The overall gameplay is just better. Everything about it is better. They added more to the map. They added more weapons. They made a better map. They evolved the zombies to be actually kind of scary. There really is just so much more content here that there really isn't a reason to play the OG version over this. Everything the OG game has, the HD has and does it better. Number 5. I found the HD game more fun to play. Less frustrating, but also a little bit more scary. I don't play most horror games because I'm one of those guys who freaks out far more easily than I should. But even playing the OG game, while it did catch me off guard a couple times, I was never really actually scared of it. The HD game put me more on edge more often, even through just loud noises you may hear that really mean nothing. I absolutely love the idea because it teaches you very early that you can't always trust the sounds that are in the game. You never know when something is actually going to jump out of nowhere at you. It's just more fun because of that. If you are thinking about playing Resident Evil again, you should play the HD version over the OG unless you just want that nostalgic kick again. Even then, I'm not really sure it's worth it anymore. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making it. If you did enjoy watching it, please consider subscribing. I upload videos every Sunday. Stay tuned at the end of the video to get an audio hint at what my next video will be. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and thanks for watching.